Welcome back. From Joe Biden to Nancy Pelosi, the praise has been pretty universal. Last week, President Trump announced that Israel and the United Arab Emirates, also known as UAE, would establish full diplomatic relations, making the UAE only the third Arab state after Egypt and Jordan to officially recognize Israel. It was a significant achievement with broad implications for the Middle East, and one of the many issues, among also the Russian interference in our elections, that I want to discuss with my next guest. So joining me now is President Trump's National Security Advisor, Robert O'Brien. Ambassador O'Brien, it is good to have you on the program again. So in announcing this agreement, the president portrayed it as an icebreaker, if you will, for Israel to normalize relations with other countries in the region, particularly Gulf states. What kind of timeline should we expect? Is this months? Is this years? Who will be number 4?
Well, thanks, Chuck. That's a great question. Super to be back with you. And let me answer it. But before I do, it's a little bit of a bittersweet weekend for the president. We had this remarkable accomplishment with the Abraham Accords, but he lost his brother, Robert, who he said was his best friend yesterday. So I just want to extend my condolences to the president, the first family, as they mourn Robert Trump's passing. But I'll tell you, last week was quite an accomplishment. It was a result of very hard diplomacy, much of it being quarterbacked by the President of the United States himself on calls with Bibi Netanyahu and Mohammed bin Zayed. He really pushed this over the finish line, but it took a lot of courage by the other leaders as well. As you indicated, there have only been 3 of these peace treaties since Israel's founding. So it's a historic accomplishment. We think that there's momentum for some additional parties to join and to normalize relations with Israel. We fanned out as soon as this was announced and have talked to, I've been on the phone with leaders in the region. The president has, Jared Kushner has, Secretary Pompeo has. And so we're quite hopeful that we can build on this momentum. I can't give a timeline because these things are tough. You know, these are the toughest negotiations in the world to broker peace between Israel and the Arab and Islamic world. But we're confident that we think there are a couple of other countries that are going to get on board soon, and we're looking forward to that.
I'm curious, Saudi Arabia, because they're the guardians, if you will, of some important religious aspects of Islam, do they end up the last, do you think, to publicly do it, or could they be next?
Look, it's possible that they could be next. The 3 great holy sites in Islam, as you know, Chuck, are Mecca, Medina, and the King of Saudi Arabia is the keeper of those 2 sites. But the other site is the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and King Hussein of Jordan and Jordan supervises that. One of the great things about this agreement is you're now going to have direct flights from those fantastic airports, both in Abu Dhabi and Dubai, into Ben Gurion and Tel Aviv. And we're going to have Arab and Muslim pilgrims coming to Jerusalem and going up to the Mount and worshiping at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And we think that's something that will be a great confidence builder. And so I'm hoping that King Salman and MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, see that development and realize that this would be great for Saudi Arabia. It would be great for the Arab people and for the Islamic world as well. So we're hopeful. We'll have to see what happens. But we're talking to a number of countries in addition to Saudi Arabia.
I'm curious, you know, there seems to be a little bit of I don't know if it's an intentional misunderstanding or not. The UAE says they feel comfortable making this deal because Israel is not going to be doing annexation. Prime Minister Netanyahu has made it clear, he made it clear this morning in remarks this morning about this, that Israel did not have to pledge to do anything and did not have to pledge not to perhaps annex parts of the West Bank. Let me ask you this. Does the United States believe Israel is entitled to annex the West Bank?
Well, what we've said all along is the contours of the West Bank have to be decided by negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And President Trump, in his vision for Middle East peace, put out a map, and that map was a starting point for negotiations. And we think the only way this can get decided and have lasting peace between Israel and the Palestinians is for them to come for the Palestinians to come to the table, to enter into some negotiations. Right. There are some facts on the ground. There's some settlements there that are durable and long-standing, and there may have to be some land swaps. That's something that's been considered all the way back to Oslo. But I think in the meantime, we're pretty confident, the UAE is confident, that Israel will not unilaterally extend sovereignty or Israeli law to parts of the West Bank, and that's what part of this deal is about. But I understand Prime Minister Netanyahu's view that ultimately there are parts of the West Bank that Israel would like to have. There are probably other parts along those borders that the Palestinians would like to have, and that's why you have a negotiation. And I'm hopeful that this UAE deal with Israel, some of the other deals that could happen with Israel, will encourage the Palestinians to come to the table, because we want a two-state solution, and we want to see the Palestinian GDP double. We want to see a great state of Palestine living in peace next to Israel. That would be fantastic.
Your loss at the UN on the extension of an arms embargo on Iran, and given how few allies the United States had on their side on this issue, do you at all look at this? Wouldn't the United States be in a better position to extend this embargo on Iran if they had remained in the Iran deal? Is that turning out to be a big diplomatic mistake? No,
I think it was. It's exactly the opposite of that, Chuck. I think getting out of the JCPOA and showing our allies and partners in the region who are terrified of a hegemonic Iran that received over $150 billion under the JCPOA in sanctions relief. They didn't take that money to improve the lives of ordinary Iranians. They took that money and engaged in proxy wars in Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen and other parts of the Middle East. And so I think getting out of the JCPOA was the predicate for this fantastic deal between UAE and Israel. And look, the only people, you had Thomas Friedman coming out with an unqualified endorsement of the UAE-Israel deal, which I never thought I'd see, President Trump being endorsed by Thomas Friedman on this deal, and David Ignatius and others. I think the only people that were against the deal were the Ayatollah and maybe Ben Rhodes. But this happened because we got out of the JCPOA, not because we should have stayed in it.
I want to move to the issue of Russian interference. It was kind of an alarming thing that the DNI put out, that Russia is actively still involved in trying to denigrate the Democratic campaign in particular. Yeah. The president likes to say, and you have said, that that this administration somehow has been tougher on Russia than the last administration. So let me ask you this: if you have, then is it a policy failure that Russia is still interfering in our elections?
Well, I think the DNI report was really terrific, and what the DNI report did, which has not come out before, is it detailed the influence and the efforts of China and of Iran to denigrate President Trump and to make sure that he's not reelected. It also talked about the Russian interference. As I've said, and as the president has made very clear, we're against every party, foreign party, trying to get involved in our elections, whether it's the communist Chinese, whether it's Putin's Russia, whether it's the theocracy in Iran. We want all of them to stay out of our election. And what we've done to make sure that happens is we've spent millions and millions of dollars hardening election infrastructure, working with 50 secretaries of states on cybersecurity, and we've also sent very strong messages to all these countries with respect to Russia. I mean, we put so many sanctions on Russia, there's almost nothing left to sanction, and we're making it very clear to them. Well, look, these are foreign powers that are adverse to the United States. We're in a period of great power competition. And look, Russia and China are on the other side. But what we've done is we've pushed back. Unlike the past administration, we've sent Javelin anti-tank missiles to Ukraine when the past administration was sending them blankets and MREs. We've sanctioned Rosneft. We've done our best to stop Nord Stream 2, the pipeline from Russia to Germany, and have had tremendous success there. We've put sanctions on hundreds of Russians. We've closed their consulates in San Francisco and in Seattle. We've closed their diplomatic annexes here. We've expelled 60 Soviet or Russian spies from the U.S. All of that was done under President Trump, not under the prior administration. So when we found out about what they're doing, we've stood up to them. And by the way, we've stood up to China in a big way, as you've seen as well. We're just not going to tolerate this.
Right, and I understand. It sounds like you're conflating. China may be rooting against President Trump, but you don't seem to have the same amount of evidence as Russia. But let me ask something on Russia.
Well,
you just talked about all of these things you've done.
I don't think that's true.
Well, we have no evidence. They released evidence about Russia. They have not released any of this evidence that you have said, though, Ambassador. None of what you have said about China was not in that intel report made public. Are you going to make this Chinese?
No, what the intel report said is that there is information to suggest that they're doing that. What we're not going to do is release sensitive intelligence. So, but if you believe the DNI in Russia, then you got to believe them on Iran and China as well. So the media can't. Right. It's not a cafeteria where you can go through and say I'll take this and not that. They've made it very clear, and look, I'll come out today and say that there are other countries that would like to interfere in our elections as well, beyond Russia, China, and Iran. And they have different preferences.
Right. One quick question, though. If Russia is a bad actor, why does the president want a summit with Vladimir Putin in the United States before the election? Why reward Vladimir Putin with that if he is a bad actor in our democracy?
We're not having a summit with Vladimir Putin before the election. In fact, Putin's has
floated. But he would like one, right?
No, what Putin has floated is doing a P5 meeting with the P5 and Germany and Russia to try and bully the U.S.
So the president doesn't want something here?
No, we've rejected that, and it's not just Russia. What the Russians are proposing is a summit with Russia, Germany, Iran, and the other P5 members to try and bully the U.S. back into this terrible JCPOA deal, which was the worst appeasement since Munich. And so we're not going to do that. We're not doing it. Now, having said all that, we'd like to have better relations with Russia. We'd like to get an arms control deal with Russia. When the Soviet Union was there and the evil empire was there, Ronald Reagan negotiated to try and reduce the nuclear weapons that are pointed at each country. We'd like to see that happen. We'd like to have good relations with Russia. But that's up to the Russians, as I've made it clear and as the president's made it clear. They've got to decide how they want to move forward on this. We'd like to get an arms control deal with Russia. That's safe for America.
So the president,
keeps us all safer. So the president has not asked for a meeting with Putin here in the United States? No, we're not doing a meeting with Putin in the United States. But at some time, look, we'd love to have Putin come here, hopefully to sign a terrific arms control deal that protects Americans and protects Russians. Ambassador Robert O'Brien, again, a huge week in the Middle East. I appreciate you coming on, sharing the president's perspective. Thanks for having me, Chuck. Take care. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.